Welcome to Power Politics, where we prepare you for your next political conversation. I'm Jeronimo Cortina, political science professor at the University of Houston.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus, a political science professor, also here at the University of Houston. Thanks for hanging out with us and talking politics. An exciting week. We got lizards. We got fundraising.
Yep.
We got debate coming up between the Senate candidates here in Texas, which may turn into a competitive race. I want to get your take on this. Let's start there. It was announced this week that Ted Cruz, the incumbent U.S. Senator from Texas, and his challenger, Colin Allred, who's a House member from the Dallas area, have set a debate. October 15th, it's going to be on stations all across the state. It's going to be on a Tuesday night. Give me your sense of kind of what the stakes are for this debate in particular.
Battle Royale,
Yeah.
I think.
You think it'll be ugly?
But I mean, it's going to be very intense, right? Because, you know, on the one hand, Ted Cruz knows that these races are becoming more and more competitive. Yeah. Just to give you some idea, in 2012, he won the election by around 16 points against Sadler. Yeah. 2018, that spread got reduced to 2.6 points. And we're going to see what's going to happen. Yeah. Interestingly enough, when you look, for example, at the polls our friends at the Texas Tribune with the University of Texas have been doing, you can see that the total disapprove numbers for Ted Cruz have been increasing since April to August, right? So that puts Senator Cruz on the offensive immediately. And then on the other hand, you have Congressman Adler, that he has been gaining some traction, but, you know, a lot of people have not heard a lot about what he's doing.
It's an interesting race, right? Because it certainly primes Democrats. We know, as you said, that you've seen that number shrink. Democrats don't like Ted Cruz.
Right.
His numbers are not good among them,
right,
for sure. But even generally speaking, they're not that good. And part of the reason is that people don't really know Ted Cruz. There is still a kind of vagueness about who he wants to be, right? He has reinterpreted himself as a kind of bipartisan warrior. He's, this week, in fact, even passed or helped to pass the kind of Semiconductor Act. That's been something that he's really trumpeted, but that's very different from the Ted Cruz who picked fights with Big Bird, right? And so a lot of people still remember that Ted Cruz. Colin Allred, you're exactly right, is a Democrat. That might be enough in some circles to get him those votes, but he has to do more. This debate probably lets him be a little bit more visible on that point. What's interesting to me about this race is that obviously it's going to be a partisan battle, right? And that's going to be pretty hardened. But there are a lot of kind of swing voters who either won't vote or may vote for one party or the other, right? It's a very small number of people. But for Allred, you've got to use the abortion issue to prime women. We may have a historic gender gap in this election. That means that you're likely to see that potentially produce a victory for him or some, marginal victory for him. You want to see college-educated voters, if you're Colin Allred, on your side. So you talk about the common sense policies that you're pursuing, right? You don't want to alienate Republicans, and so you talk about oil and gas jobs. So there is a way for him, there is a path for him to be that moderate. The other thing I think, and I want to get your take on this too, if you've been watching these ads, right, you're watching the Texans game, which didn't go as well as we would have liked last week, you certainly see the kind of dynamic, right? Ted Cruz's ads are all about kind of why Colin Allred is wrong on the border, right? He's wrong on issues of LGBTQ, right? He sort of embraces, what he says is women playing or college sports or men playing in women's sports. So that's something that Ted Cruz is trying to prime his base with. Allred is looking at very family-focused issues, right? Like bread and butter issues, literally peanut butter in the ad with his wife. That, to me, is a kind of clear sense of where they're going. Allred wants to make it clear that, he is a Democrat who is that kind of moderate. Ted Cruz needs to prime the base because the real game here is about turnout, right?
Correct.
Allred has to get high turnout in urban areas to match what Cruz is almost likely going to get as turnout in Republican rural areas.
Right. So that's very interesting because another point is, and we have seen Senator Cruz's reaction, is this issue of, working with the other side and these bipartisan, I guess, mode of that Allred is really pushing, right?
Who is legitimately bipartisan.
Exactly.
Is it selling?
Oh, I think it's selling because Cruz is reacting to that. You just said it. The semiconductor is like, oh yeah, I work with sure, this time,
week.
right? But historically, you have not, right? And it's, highlighting, especially in very important issues for certain parts of the state, like immigration, already saying, look, I want to work. Border security is important. He has distanced himself from the Biden administration, and he has attacked Senator Cruz in the sense of, he didn't want to pass one of the strongest bipartisan border security pieces of legislation that we could have. Yeah. So I think that is important. And then, as you say, the common sense issues that, as we know, common sense is sometimes the less common of the senses, but common sense issues and bread and butter, I think that could resonate very much. Why? Because people are up to here, right, in terms of, these issues regarding very, very polarizing situations.
Yeah, and I mean, Cruz's negatives are high in part because of some of the reputation he's gotten as somebody who only cares about himself, right? The podcast, which feathers his nest, or the fact that he fled the state during Uri, the winter storm to go to Cancun, right? Just is a bad look. And that's something that Allred can use against it. I'm sure he'll bring that up. Oh, yeah. But this debate is a moment, I think, for two things. Number one, a possible investment opportunity, right? This could be yours, right? So Allred obviously is only one cog in this bigger map that the Democrats are looking at nationwide. We talked about this last week, but there's a really good chance Democrats are going to lose Montana and West Virginia, right? They're probably going to win in Maryland and Arizona, although that's still debatable. So that leaves 4 seats, Florida and Texas included in those, where Democrats are potentially going to get a seat. Texas is never really considered to be very kind of in the mix. But if Allred can make a good showing and the polls continue to close, like you said, it's possible this could be an investable moment for national Democrats who flood money into his account. Right. The other is that this is a pivot point. They've got to switch from persuasion to mobilization, right? And at that point, it'll be the 15th of October. It's literally one more week of early voting or something like that, and the election's very soon after. It's too late to really persuade more people. You've got to mobilize your base. So Absolutely. That's going to be key.
Absolutely. But when you look at the base composition, that's a very important key factor, right? Senator Cruz's base, it's very limited in the sense of not going, above and beyond crossing, certain demographics. Yeah. For Allred, I think that it's more challenging, but he has, his bucket, to put it this way, is deeper and wider in the sense that they can start digging deeper and deeper. And for Senator Cruz, it's like, I need all of you guys to go out and vote because the balance of demographics and the balance or the opportunity, at least the potential opportunity for turnout and mobilizing voters, I think lies higher with Democrats than in this case for Republicans.
That's a great point. I think that at the end of this story, if Allred wins, it will be because they invested early, which means they had to raise a lot of money, and they were able to cement the notion that he was a moderate Democrat. Correct. The kind of Democrat that historically won Texas very easily. So that to me is going to be the tail of the tape. Now, if he can hold that line, then he'll be in good shape, better shape than other past candidates have been. But that takes money, right?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the money fight. You may have seen this week that the first gentleman, Kamala Harris is... Second gentleman. Second gentleman is here in San Antonio and Austin to campaign, raise money, and eat a little bit of Whataburger. And some of the text you've seen is that he's ordered a number 2, and I think in what is probably a clear scandal talked about In-N-Out Burger at a Whataburger in Texas. That's a no-go. But he did meet with Willie Nelson, so that maybe saves some of his Texanness. But he raised a lot of money, and that is in keeping with a kind of thrust of where the Harris campaign has been, raising millions, hundreds of millions of dollars since she took over. Is this going to be a difference maker nationwide and or in Texas?
Money matters, one way or the other. We just said for mobilization purposes, you need money. For ads, you need money. So, yes, I do think it matters. It's, when he was in San Antonio, he raised about a little bit more than $1 million, right, on one night. And that is a record in terms of, raising that money for a presidential campaign for the Democrats. So I think it's very important in the sense of getting, to me, it's... let's say it's a signal or an indicator that the base and that donors are motivated and are excited about a potential outcome.
Which is a metric of excitement, right?
Exactly.
As you said earlier, I think it's really important. The money obviously is something that's tangible, and resources are clearly important, but it's the enthusiasm that's a big part of it. Now, in contrast, the Republicans are also raising money here. Donald Trump is going to be here raising money. J.D. Vance was in Austin in the similar time period raising money. John Cornyn was helping J.D. Vance raise money weeks before. So clearly Texas is fueling a lot of what's happening. But unfortunately, the money is leaving the Lone Star State, right? It's going to Pennsylvania. It's going to Montana. In places where Democrats are hopeful they can hold those seats, but realistically may not be able to. So one argument from Democrats forever has been that we don't want to be your ATM anymore. We want you to invest in Texas. That's happened occasionally, but it's been pretty sporadic because, like we've said, it's been hard for the Democrats to get traction. But the first gentleman also talked a lot about the policy issues at stake. One was about ballot access. Another was about the abortion issues. So these are definitely things that are motivators for Democrats. And we've talked a lot about how this might play out. But do you think that this kind of mobilization is likely to pay off for down ballot Democrats who are hoping to pick up, a handful of House seats, maybe the U.S. Senate seat? They probably won't win the presidency, right? But there's a good chance that they can get close enough that maybe next cycle will be seen as investable.
Yeah, I think so. Why? Because we have seen, especially in big urban areas, that elections are becoming more and more competitive on the one hand, and that's tilting towards the Democratic side. Then we have seen that, population growth happens in these big urban centers, right? The Texas Triangle, the Austin area, San Antonio area, and then the Houston metro area, right? So
it's where all the best tacos are,
exactly.
Right? Especially the bottom part of the triangle. The top part, Dallas, we'll see.
Right. And that area, right, and that Texas Triangle is where the real population growth has moved forward. So we have a lot of people coming from other states, and people that come from other states also bring their political ideologies with them. So that's going to be something that we're going to see in this election cycle if the new movers, the newcomers, are going to tilt the balance one way or the other. But obviously, at the end, what it matters is that these issues we have seen in 2022 and in the other midterm, elections of years that we have had, that abortion mobilizes people. Abortion, especially within, suburban women and college-educated people, really mobilizes people. So I think that at the end, a ballot, the bottom part of the ballot, is going to have a significant impact as well.
It's a great point. Texas women tend to be slightly more conservative than other women in other places. That is historically been true, but this might be an issue where you see women shifting their allegiances, and also some college-educated men, right? Because that is part of the kind of dynamic that we're seeing play out in those suburbs. So you have to really peel that orange, right? Because it's a demographic deep dig, right? The demographics are not just sort of who you are, but also how well educated you are, how long you've been in a particular place, where you live, right? Because as you know, geography in large part determines politics. So these things are all just, hard for a campaign to have to, piece out.
And we saw in 2022, right, that the big red tsunami was basically stopped, right, on its foot, or I don't know how you stop a tsunami on its foot, but it was really cold stop, right, by suburban women voters. I mean, they were the ones that particular demographic was the one say, we're not going to go there. And it was part of the rhetoric that that especially Republicans were using, and that did not felt well with women voters. So I think now you are, in addition to that rhetoric, you are adding abortion, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a curious issue because it's not about, from a religious point or moral point or whatever it is. It's just the fact that women do not have that access anymore.
It reminds me of the healthcare debate in 2018, where that was a big mobilizer for Democrats. And Democrats did very well. As you said, Beto O'Rourke got very close to Ted Cruz, and you had a bunch of down ballot races that flipped. So that's a potential point. And I think that's right? The sort of notion of abortion as healthcare is a big part of it. So Donald Trump talking about how he's going to repeal and replace and how he was going to come up with a plan, right? What did he say? He has a concept of a plan.
Concept of a plan.
That's going to be hard to sell because people want to have something certain, especially
Right.
if they already have it. They don't want it taken away. But speaking of giving and taking away, on the money fight, as you said, Harris is raising big dollars, right? Like crazy money. And one of the things that's happening is that she's transferring money to the party, right? So she just this week transferred $10 million to the DCCC, the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, which is the finance arm of the Democratic Party that deals with House candidates. Down ballot matters. There are a lot of races at stake in places like Orange County, places like rural Pennsylvania. Democrats are hoping to pick up seats or hold seats. The balance of power here is really critical. We talked about the Senate. My guess is it's going to stay, or it's going to flip to a Republican, but the House is really still in question, right? The number of seats is it's very small. The amount of money that Donald Trump has transferred to the RNCC, the DCCC counterpart is zero. Not 1 cent, not a thin dime. The problem is that he's got this great persona that can easily raise money, but they're too busy or too preoccupied to do it. He was supposed to do a fundraiser with the Senate team, fundraising team for Republicans, and couldn't because he was in court, right? So just logistically, politically, it's become a real problem for Republicans to raise that money, and it may be a problem down the stretch where they've got to have this happen. Now, let's bring this back to Texas. Campaign finance reports show that the Texas Democratic Party raised 4.5 times as much as the Texas Republican Party. That is a stunning number. And again, as you say, like looking down ballot is really impactful. The marginal change here could be really important. So this is going to be a real money fight to the end. But obviously that's going to be how much they can open people's wallets. Can they pry that money from people?
Well, I mean, yes. And the money and how much you invest has very important implications, right? And these implications go beyond the election, right? They get entangled in terms of who's going to be our next speaker in the Texas House.
That's a great question.
So that creates, right, especially very important, mathematical probabilities models in the sense
you lost me with probabilities.
I know, but it's fine. In the sense that, it's going to matter. And it's going to matter in terms of who's going to be elected our next Speaker of the Texas House.
That's a great point. And we've got at least 2 Republican Speaker candidates here who are trying to very finely count those numbers. We reported last week that the Republicans who were not Phelan supporters or trying to coalesce around alternative, David Cook, a representative from Mansfield in North Texas, has won the endorsement of the non-Phelan voters. They all met at the County Line Barbecue in Austin, but they weren't there for the smoked meats. They were there for the smoke-filled room, which was to make a choice about who they were going to support for Speaker, who wasn't Dade Phelan. They decided on Cook. Like I said, he got 45 votes of the about 50 or so that were there. That's about a little over half of the GOP caucus that's at 86. Speaker Phelan says, doesn't matter. I've got the votes. He also says, by the way, this is against the rules of the House, but that's a different problem that no one seems to worry or care about. But if you're Dade Phelan, I guess my question is, are you worried about keeping the speakership?
Well, I mean, a lot of variables, right? Yes, I would be worried, but here's where the math comes in. In order to, be named or elected Speaker of the House, you need 76 votes, right? A simple majority when they open the legislative session in January. However, the interesting thing is that in order to get Republicans, the caucus instruct GOP members to vote for the candidate that the caucus by a majority has elected. So that's about, 52 votes. But the interesting thing here is that within the group that supported Representative Cook, you have 20 that are not in the part of the legislative caucus. I mean, part of the ledge, right? So it's like those 20 are kind of iffy, and here's where the money comes in, right? Here's where the money, especially when you're trying to run in competitive seats currently, held by Democrats, if you're putting more money as the Democrats are doing, then you're losing potentially numbers, right? So Phelan may have some, simulations, MCMC chains just going and running and seeing what happens if this here, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I think the fact that, that Democrats are putting so much money in down ballot races, I think that that's something that benefits Representative Phelan in the sense of being able to, get elected.
Yeah.
And then fireworks, if he gets elected, are going to happen between the House and the Senate.
No doubt, which are likely to happen anyway, even if he's not Speaker. But it certainly will be exacerbated because the argument against Phelan is that, he's not conservative enough and he's putting Democrats as chairs. That's a debate that's been a long time coming, but definitely is something that he's going to have to worry about. My take is this. If it's the case that anybody except Phelan is Speaker, everything slows down. That we won't see production from this particular session anywhere near as high as it's been in the past couple of sessions, which has already been sort of historically pretty low. So that's definitely a problem. Now, 90% of what the ledge does is totally nonpartisan, right? They're passing bills that are just kind of maintenance and kind of keeping the trains running on time. The 10% that is controversial is the reason that things gum up, and Democrats will do everything they can
to
slow it down. Everything. And remember, Trey Martinez-Fisher is the caucus chair for Democrats, and he is an expert. They called him the Prince of Pooh, the Prince of these points of order where it just gums up the works. The other factor is this. Like you said, House Senate's really an interesting dynamic. There was rumors that Dan Patrick, the lieutenant governor, wanted John Smithee, who was in the running to be one of the non-Phelan speaker candidates, being promoted. That's interesting because again, it's sort of Patrick wanting to be in charge of both chambers. He spent a lot of money and time campaigning for some of the people who were anti-Phelan because Patrick and Phelan don't get along. But that's going to be an interesting dynamic to watch, too. So I think no matter how you cut it, Phelan needs Democrats to win the speakership, and that'll be a point of contention for Republicans. But let's talk about a different statewide official, and let's talk about voting. This almost turned into the Ken Paxton show since there's just like so much about Paxton this week. But Ken Paxton has been involved in several lawsuits involving voting. So one involving the Latino civic organization JOLT. The Attorney General had sued them in federal court, basically saying their voter registration efforts were illegal because they're targeting people who are not citizens. The Attorney General actually got knocked back on an effort to try to keep Bexar County from sending out mail ballots to people who were otherwise eligible. A state district court this last week said that he was not able to do that and was kind of moot anyway because they already sent it. Bexar County says basically this is something we're allowed to do. These are all eligible voters. Ken Paxton says that you're doing this against the laws that have been put into place. How do you see this playing out in the kind of weeks as we grow into early voting and then election day?
I think that, there is no ground in terms of these lawsuits. And the reason behind that is because, the Texas Election Code, Section 18.061.
Wow, okay. We got cite too. Okay. Footnote that.
requires the Secretary of State and the counties, to maintain the voter roll, right? So in the sense of you're mailing something, right? You're mailing a registration application to a voter that may or may not be eligible, right? The Texas Election Code, Section 13.001, has 5 requirements, right? And you have to show proof that you are going to be 18 years of age on election day, that you are a U.S. citizen, right? So when you process that, right, the system would automatically say, you're not a U.S. citizen, therefore you cannot be registered.
Yeah, the group's registering people to vote. Like, you may register people who think they're eligible but aren't, and then the Secretary of State will clean that out because you're not actually eligible.
All the county registers, right? So it's a joint effort in the sense of, who's responsible in this case. So, Attorney General Paxton said, well, the responsibles are the counties. But then the counties are going to say,
it's really messy.
It's the other,
And you and I have done a lot of academic work in this, and you definitely see like a lot of confusion about what's to happen and how, and just getting guidance from one entity or the other is really a challenge. So it boils down to this. It's about politics, right?
Absolutely.
It's hard to imply intent here, but like Democrats basically are saying that the Attorney General is trying to mess with who can vote, and that's designed to intimidate voters. Whether it will or not, we don't know. But like we've said, there are a lot of marginal cases. There are a lot of marginal districts here where, down ballot Democrats are hoping to pick up a seat or hold a seat. So a couple of hundred votes here and there may actually be a big difference. So we'll see how this plays out because the litigation's still ongoing, and obviously we're just sort of entering the phase of early voting. But I want to talk about this last thing, and that's about Ken Paxton and lizards. Does Ken Paxton hate lizards? This week, he is suing the federal government over an endangered lizard in Texas oil country. In effect, he's suing the Biden administration over a particular law which allows them to protect endangered species, in this case, a 3-inch long lizard that is living in the Permian Basin, which is around Midland and Odessa. Obviously, rich oil country. If you've ever been there, it's just constant pump jacks slurping up oil out of the ground. I love this because it's the intersection of my favorite things, law and politics and wildlife. Tell me what's going to happen here.
Well, I mean, the whole point is that, that lawsuit says that the federal government, especially Fish and Wildlife Service, has not determined in which areas oil and gas companies can, drill.
Right.
And if they drill in an area that they're not supposed to drill without knowing which area that is, they can get fines up to $50,000. Yeah. So basically, Paxton is saying it's like, you have Fish and Wildlife Service, you have to determine which areas we can and we cannot.
Guidance. Yeah, interesting.
But that's going to be a question for next week and see if the lizards survive or not. I'm Jeronimo Cortina.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. The conversation keeps up next week.